worries, I don't need a mic since it's such a beautiful small group. But I thought I'll use it because there's a live stream happening as well. So there are people who have tuned in. Hello to you who have tuned in. Hello to you all who've come in person. This means a lot. Thank you very much. I know it's been a busy day. If you've been along to the march as well, so your legs must be aching. But hopefully, please, actually, this is a request of mine. Use this as your home. Rich Mix, whenever I walk in, it always feels like I can just take off my shoes and do what I want. And I want you all to be able to feel like that, especially because it's such a small group as well. And I think actually that's going to work in our favor today in terms of the sacredness of this energy in this space that we cultivate. First of all, a quick introduction. I don't know how many of you may have been to a Don't Sleep on Us event in the past, but by show of hands, just one. I knew it. I literally knew it. Okay, two, obviously, yeah, my sis. So I run events called Don't Sleep on Us. It's been going on since 2018, self-funded for the most part until I joined Rich Mix as an artistic curator. And essentially the premise was always to celebrate people of the global majority in London and our power, and celebrate, you know, creatives being able to create change and enact change in their communities. This event is actually 14 months since the last event, so it's been a really long break for me. I was asked by Rich Mix to put on this event the end of last year as part of their Roots and Endz program. So roots being, you know, the origins of communities, and then ends being what next and what now. And if I'm honest, I was very hesitant and I resisted it for a while because of my sheer lack of knowledge about the realities of the world. And I think a lot of that came up for me post 7th of October, actually, in terms of there's a lot that I haven't known. And if I'm to be honest and be transparent with you here, that is the God's honest truth. I did not know what Israel was. I did not know how the world worked. I didn't know there was an alternative to capitalism. I didn't know basic things about our history. I in many ways, am very much a student in that. So I might have curated this and put it, you know, made it happen, but actually there have been a team of people that have actually made this happen, and that's the contributors you'll see today. And also all of you here in the room, because it's so participatory. This thing that you see on the floor, in a second I'll explain, actually invites you all to also be active voices in this space. And that's the beauty of how this space has come together, again, completely outside of me. So it's a team of volunteers, the speakers that you see, the artists that you'll see as we go through the night, and the exhibition that you'll see. Thank you to the volunteers who, I'll point them out at the end of the event. Hopefully you'll be able to stay for a couple of hours, and I think we should we should end the night at about 11 o'clock. How does that sound for everyone? Yeah, okay, good. What I'd like to say is this is a safe space. This is for us, by us. This is a place for us to actually critique. So moving away a little bit from the celebratory, energetic, I'm always the life of the party, like I'm always here with the mic, like cracking jokes and la. But I think in many ways, just as I've evolved, this space has evolved. There's usually 200, 300 people in there, and there's DJs, and there's wacky performances, and here in this space. And this one actually feels much more aligned right now with where we are at as a community right now. And one of those things actually is, you know what, the physical spaces that we have are really to come together right now are the marches. But outside of that, all we have is our digital conversations that we have on our phone, or digital conversations that we're having on Zoom. Actually, I met some of you through Zoom conversations. And I think that when Rich Mix offered this space, it became a question of we have a free yard. We have an obligation, pretty much, to come together in person and to have solidarity in person and to critique the situation at hand, which is actually what are the parallels that can be drawn from what's happening in history right now to what's happening right now to the mistakes that have been repeated and repeated in history. As someone who's Hindu Gujarati, again, I go back to this point of I was very unaware of lots of this stuff. And that's not just down to my privileged position. I think it's a lot down to me being a second-gen immigrant who hasn't been politicized in this way until the 7th of October. So I hope that explains a little bit about who I am, and you get a sense of what really the intention is here. I hope we go away from this space feeling a sense of, do you know what, actually, there's a lot of power in us as people, and actually there's a lot of power in being politicized, and a lot of power in knowing what our actions are going forwards. So hopefully this is a space that allows us to do that. And yeah, I'll do thank yous at the end. And right, so what is this thing here? It looks like a heart. Like a real human. Wow. I didn't even consider it. I don't think we considered that at all. What else could it be? Thank you for that. Was that you, Jimmy? Yeah, it was. Of course it was. Heart, yes. What else? So, because everybody arrived very promptly and on time, we were sort of setting up. But actually, what we'd love for you to do is, if you feel able to, I'll invite you to sort of stand and take a look at the symbols. The red ones represent, I'll just take this off, sorry. I know a lot of effort's gone into this. Actually, I'm just here ripping it apart. So the red ones represent oppressions, and the green ones represent the resistance. And a lot of this, the theme throughout the day, the night, will be the oppressions and then the resistance, the roots and the ends. We'd love for you to get up, have a look at where and what some of these oppressions and these resistance symbols are, and where they repeat along this kind of map, this sketched out map of quote-unquote South Asia and what makes South Asia. And then once you've looked at these symbols, and this symbol on the resistance side and the oppression side, take a look where else it repeats here, and then go over to our wonderful exhibition that has been curated solely by Prabjeet and Ishri, who I will point out to you later on, and have a look at what the details are on that exhibition as well. So this is just 5 minutes just for you to take a look at what's happening here on this map and make sense of it, and using that back wall over there as well. How does that sound? Yeah? I'll give you 5 minutes. Thank you so much, everyone, and we'll meet back here in a second. as well. Keep saying day, but it's definitely night. Jet lag, maybe. I don't know. Thank you so much. Thanks for your promptness and for listening to direction. I think it helps to have a smaller group because everything's happening really quickly. Okay. Get yourself settled, get yourself comfortable, and we'll get started. If you can go to the next slide, please, Elliot. Next one. So, how the night is going to go is a bit like this. I'm going to introduce you to Sarah Huck in a second, who has taken a seat very comfortably on the sofa. And so I hope we can all give Sarah a very warm welcome in a second. And then we're going to go into the first part of the panel, which is roots. And then we'll have a 10-minute break with a prompt on the screen, so you can either use that to, freshen up or have further the conversations or take a look at the exhibition again if you didn't get the chance. And then we will wrap with Amrit Gaur's art as well. So if you came in slightly earlier, you'd have heard the wonderful mic check, sound check that was going on. Beautiful. Just wait till you see the rest. And then we have 25 minutes of an open mic. This is something that we tend to do at Don't Sleep on Us, where people come up and they share the projects they're working on, the things they're doing, any thoughts they've had through the night. This is, again, a space for all of us. 25 minutes, I'm pretty sure we can get through all of us, who knows. But I just wanted to share the run-through of the night, just so that everyone knows, and so you can feel free to stay on for as much as you can if you feel like you have the energy to. But I will just reiterate, this is your space as much as it is ours. It's your home. You don't feel like you have to show up in any particular way. As you are is just perfect. It's been a heavy couple of months, so please just go easy on that front. So Sarah Huck is a London-based artist, photographer, sacred medicine practitioner, writer and workshop facilitator, and an all-round incredible human being who I've had the pleasure of meeting through Zoom calls of Breathe and Grieve sessions, grieving and breathing meditation that Yazimin has been holding since the 7th of October every week. And so we met virtually, and then we've just recently met in person, and everything will make sense as to why Sarah is sat here in front of you in a second. Her work is multi and interdisciplinary in approach, and she will be reading excerpts from her medicinal writing as an artistic offering to open our space. Sarah's work is always reflective of personal experience and processes, and often explores intercultural relationships and ecologies, power dynamics, transformation, and the interactions between art, nature, and social change. For example, the use of photography, drawing, writing, movement, and imagination as healing and clearing tools. Her recent experiential research explores the relationships between creativity, healing, sacred medicine, and cultural psychosis. Sarah has exhibited both nationally and internationally in solo and group exhibitions, including Welcome Collection 2021, Tate Modern, the British Library, Daily Life, National Maritime Museum, and Bromley by Bow Centre. So without further ado, I will please give it up for Sarah Huck, and I will pass the mic over to Sarah now.
Thank you. I'm not used to using mics, so hopefully you can hear me, and if you can't, let me know. Thank you. So, thank you for inviting me this evening, and for Jimmy, who's sitting over there, for bringing me together with Yazi, who's on the ether. So, there's many beautiful connections that have formed in some kind of slightly divine way over the last months through very, very testing times for where we are as a species right now. So one of the practices that I have been cultivating for the last few years is a medicine writing practice, in part self-healing, but also very tuned into what might come through for the collective, knowing that I am as you are, we're all one. So for me, that perspective, whatever is in me is probably most likely in you somewhere buried, and vice versa. And so this kind of excavating that happens in this writing, this play sometimes, and the theme of this evening, oppressions and resistance, the word oppression, press on, an invitation to keep going. The resistance is in the word, press on. And what happens when we hold oppression that someone else gave us, rather than learning, press on, keep going, keep going, keep going. So I thought I'd share with you one or two little pieces of writing. They are medicine writing, so I invite you to maybe take a few breaths and actually just allow yourself to kind of rest into your body and just let the words move through you. They're dated, so we might do a little time travel. This is from Tuesday, the 17th of October, 2023. This is the first time I'm able to put pencil to paper in this way in some months. It is urgent to find and give voice now to the very real states of distress and suffering, solidarity and humaning that are needed. Is conflict a natural state? All of those words individually loaded. What is conflict? What is What is natural? What is state? As I see this written, I'm catapulted to the stories and events of the preceding weeks, of the questions I've been asking, like where is the humanity? Of the demands we must make, of the refusals to get sucked into machines and mechanisms of stolen focus of attention, of power and powerlessness. Gathering myself from moments of paralysis, I'm continuously inspired by so many brave and consistently visible friends who always center peace, who always center humanity, who always center keeping going to be the best they can be, who center connection, wit, warmth, hospitality, humility, despite their families being annihilated by barbarism and relentless brutality. Courageous, brave, humble, and endlessly resilient. With grace, poetry, and deep tenderness, poets like Mahmoud Darwish with The Butterfly's Burden say everything in a sentence. How does the butterfly become itself? The caterpillar crawls and eats and reconstitutes itself through turning into gloop. Imaginal cells that do not know what or how they become, what they become. The butterfly is an entirely different form, from crawling to flying, from being a creature sometimes viewed with disgust and fear, it eats a lot, to one revered and that inspires delight. An alchemical transformation of the burden of a suffering, grounded body to one that both flies and dances and lifts the spirit with its delicacy and beauty. And this is not just an observation of nature, but of our nature, of our humanness and spirit. As I write this, I hold the hearts and souls of those killed in captivity, of their names and their stories, of their innocence and absolute presence and right to exist, as has all living things. My heart has broken and broken and broken this week. I've cried thousands of tears with a lump in my throat and through my chest. Yet these tears have been prayers, dua for the dead and for the safety of the still alive, for the conscience of the blind world around me that seems oblivious to the truth of what is against nature, of the war machine that tries to replicate itself like a virus. Though for me, a virus has more imagination, sensitivity, and intelligence. What is this but a meme of fear, a meme of hatred, a meme of outrage. None of these informed by the elegant simplicity of truth and the sacredness of all life. We are all born naked and with nothing. We all die naked and with nothing. Contained in this nothing is no thing, but truly everything we need to live well. To find harmony in tune with the rhythms of life, the seasons, the soil, the sun, which give us everything freely. No land belongs to any of us. We are born of and on it. There is no ownership, only kinship. We all belong where we are. If home is where the heart is and the heart is in our body, we belong where we are at any moment. This may be everywhere, all at once. And when we die, that just expands all our possibilities. People who know this in their bones can never be exterminated, because those that do the killing forget we are one, and thus divide themselves into fractured souls, always searching for one. "120 days later, and we're still here. Still searching for one." There's been more writing. This is from the 19th of December, 2023. Intergenerational embodied wisdom and transmissions, observing tenderness and gentle humanity, an acceptance of all of us, a knowing of how high an honor and a pleasure to serve and care for each other, no matter our bodies' shape, color, packaging, ability. This week, certain things have struck me deeply, particularly in relation to care, grief, and community. How the society I live in seems to love to tell others what to do, but demonstrates itself little or no wisdom or integrity or compassion in being able to know how to navigate or stand up to indoctrination or brainwashing or coming home to oneself. The inner work we are invited to do in order that the collective can thrive and flourish, everyone understanding their precious beingness is of value. The elderly, the differently abled, the children, women, young men who tirelessly care and carry, who dig out from the rubble, who display honor, love, courage, selfless clarity in ways rarely seen in the society around me. In fact, there is the norm, not the exception. I come back to Tina Turner's line, "We don't need another hero." I time travel to this culture I was consuming as I was fed in the 80s. Knight Rider, the A-Team, MacGyver, Loving Wonder Woman, Supergran, and the things I wished for us that were missing from my cultural orbit. The ways of learning of my own heritage and examples of incredible people, though perhaps this was the landscape of my own family, yet I've had to unpack and shed layers of ingested false narratives fed to me by the Western media of who I might be as a Muslim woman, despite knowing I was not in their fantasized, unreal projections. Who was shown as faceless and powerless and oppressed, and who was given space for voice and true expression. it feels necessary to speak back to the lies and violence of colonial mind tricks and its supremacist setups. Even the word ego was not in my vocabulary growing up, as my family conditioning and value system was almost too much, prioritizing the collective, often to the point of exclusion or annihilation of the self. It was messy and complex and hard to find ways to articulate or share the experience of oneness. And I've had to learn to listen to other people's stories of themness, and to know what this rich soup of human experience in context, in relationship with our location, environments, and expressions has infinite possibility, of knowing that intention, motivation, source energy, and our multidimensional effects matter greatly, that a life-affirming, creative, and loving approach is infinitely more generative, generous, and abundant than a fearful, insecure, death or killing, controlling mechanism that breeds scarcity and lies. Being able to surrender to trusting in the unknown with an unwavering faith feels infinitely more courageous than fearfully clinging to dysfunctional familiarity, despite the multitudes of invitations to grow. I know these states intimately, and am often invited to choose. They are both portals. There's one more piece of writing I would like to share, and then maybe I think that's enough. As someone who's experienced multiple oppressions and marginalizations from systems here of supposed care, health and social care, I've had to find ways to keep resisting, and that resisting has been pushed down so strongly. There's something in this energy here that does not like people to be in their wholeness, especially those whom they like to push down. So the invitation has remained, keep showing up, keep showing up. This one I will read from my phone. Excuse me while I find it. It was written on the 3rd of May, 2023. There's a small pretext to this, which is that I was caring for a friend who had sustained serious brain injuries whilst sectioned in a psychiatric hospital. And to see and experience from a different side how to deal with this was something. It's a piece called Time. The expansiveness of 3 minutes when with art sisters. Depth and beauty and power and resonances aplenty. The last and first 3 minutes. A book in a box in a garage found in a charity shop. A magical cover with a train journey. My favorite kind of journey. Having to be on time and then feel the expansion of time as it slows down on a long train journey. The mention of Vietnam transports me back there. How things can change in 3 minutes or less. Sometimes 3 seconds is enough. 3, a magic number. Today we were 3. 3 sisters, tree sisters, all understanding the multidimensionality of a rich life. In Basel, much evidence of the richness in life, not just materially, but how all the transport runs exactly on time, all the time. In London, when in flow, I always get a bus in less than 3 minutes. How can a whole universe expand, unfold, circulate, heal, contract, and birth a new one in less than 3 minutes? A spacious expansion, time for breath, air, particles to collide and mingle thousands of times in many worlds and lives everywhere all at once. I used to feel overwhelmed sensing into knowing all of this, or just being aware, observing the unobservable. But now, in the container that is my earth body, this small but deadly packaging, I'm just curious. I'm curious about how I've changed, as I've changed the way I look at things, the things I look at change. And I mean over time, long time. In one dimension, perhaps 30 years is the same as 3 minutes in another dimension. The memories of the field, the dimension of Rumi's timeless field, beyond ideas of right and wrong. Who else dares to meet in that field, knowing that in such expansive space-time, there is only love? The journey to get there and the walking each other home. I remember as if it was 3 minutes ago, the barefoot walking around the field in Shoreham, Kent. The dojo, Kayosi, the rapid expansion and cracking of one dimension of my universe at the time, the breaking open of connections and soul passages in multiverses that are vivid now as they were then. Hazel wrote me Rumi's poem in my tiny book, my visitor's book. Out beyond ideas of right and wrong, there is a field. I'll meet you there. Having come from that field, literally, physically, actually, metaphorically and metaphysically, and in many other ways, was not easy to explain to a psychiatrist who'd never been and didn't know it was real. Yesterday, I sat with Jay. She treated me to breakfast. I held sacred space as we are both in the field. I articulated this well to her psychiatrist, who looked at me respectfully and acknowledged his own limitations as not a soul worker or doctor, except his compassionate way clearly indicated he was. A mutual respect, and at least he knew the field existed. I think he'd rather have been in it with us, rather than in the clinical, uninspiring, though clean enough, soulless space we sat in together. The great thing about space-time travel is that I now bring the field with me, now that I know how. I like to just leave you there.
Give it up for Sarah, please. Wow. That makes me cry every time. Yeah. So we're ready for our panel. Are we ready for the panel? Yes, we are. Would the panelists like to come up, and then Prabjit will do an introduction as when you're settled and seated comfortably. Just have us. And I'll bring you water. I'll do that now. That's my job.
Hello, welcome, and thank you for spending Saturday night with us. It's a pleasure to be here, and a pleasure to be sharing the sofas with our lovely panellists. I'm just going to give you a bit of a breakdown in terms of how we're rolling a little bit throughout this event, and then we'll get cracking. So the first panel is very much about roots, and you kind of digging up those South Asian roots, looking at kind of colonialism in those geographies to start with, and kind of, to borrow Zara's word, a bit of time travelling, I think, was required. And we might ask, well, why? Why are we navel-gazing when the world's on fire? And I think it's important to start here so that you can understand the oneness which we all kind of operate. So we'll be looking at past colonial oppressions and resistances. We'll be looking at current South Asian resistances and oppressions, and concluding with a little bit of psychology smattered in, and a kind of, hopefully that psychology will help us understand the kind of oppressions and resistances that we face here in the UK and beyond. So recognising those patterns. You might also ask why the British Empire, apart from, got to start somewhere, let's start here. Apart from that, I think it's just a useful exercise because it was the largest empire, and the reason for its scale was its unique ingredient, or khichdi, of fascism and capitalism mixed with colonialism that allowed it to become the beast that it really was. So I think that's why we're starting where we are, just to give a bit of kind of context. Before we go into the kind of discussion, what we're going to do is today we're going to start the panel with the Q&A. So we're going to deconstruct the kind of knowledge is here, and questions are over there, but invite comments as well in the beginning if you so wish. Invite questions, and I'd like you to summon an entity of collective knowledge, because the knowledge is held in your bodies and your histories and your lineages, as well as the knowledges that we hold. So before we do that, before we kind of open the floor for questions, what I'd like to do is introduce our panelists, so that you understand things, the knowledges that they hold, and things that you can kind of have a discussion or open a dialogue regarding. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Tasnima Udin, who's an international labour organiser and works for a driver-led global federation working with driver unions from Panama to India. She previously worked with Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh and stateless communities in Assam in India, for those that are aware of the NRCCA issue. She's been advocating against their kind of citizenship deprivation, and we're drawing some parallels on those later. She's recently completed her bar course and is a leading member of the Save Brick Lane campaign, a very, very local campaign. And then her dissertation was also linked to linking the 1971 genocide with 1947, drawing those lines. And that kind of prompts me to say, we're not delving deep, but we're looking at the broad brushstrokes today. So that's kind of going to be a part of that. I'd also like to welcome...
You can cut the last couple of lines of my bio.
I did already. Just shorten. Essentially, Saima Tariq is an artist and a researcher in London working on oral archives, audio experiments, and writing, including 1,000 Channels, live radio, R22 is Burning, and Cafe Universe. She recently exhibited at Delay Lines, a show in Tower Hamlets at the local history and a library of archives. And she combines kind of archival, contemporary field recordings, especially from East London, also locally centred as well, and brings together historic and complex anti-race and social justice struggles within these pieces. And her PhD focus was the kind of 1947 partition of British India, and has resulted in a project around partitioned listening, which is an ongoing project of hers. So really exciting panelists who kind of speak to that breadth and depth of local to kind of global kind of oppressions and resistances. What I'd like to do now is kind of open up the floor and invite questions, queries, directions where you'd like to kind of see in this discussion. Would anybody like to, go for it? Yeah, sure. was there anything that came up for you when you saw the oppressions or resistances on the geography there or on the wall? Would anybody like to share on that?
Any questions to start us off? Yeah, I'll come over to you.
You used the term British India when you talked about the partition, the Batwara of undivided India. Let's get away from the colonial term, please. The oppressive colonial term. It was, whatever it was, let's get away from British India. Please.
Thank you. And yeah, go for it.
Thank you, agree with you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you for that point. Actually, during my PhD, when I was trying to talk about this historical geography, for me, British India is useful in terms of talking about when the Crown actually had direct rule over what was formerly known as Hindustan. And even that term, I think, is problematic for many people. But British India doesn't count that period pre-1857 when the East India Company were basically having mercenary, kind of anarchic rule over the region that we know now as ex-British India. So I understand that, and I mean, I think we're going to talk a lot about language and terminologies, and I'm really interested in that, and like what kind of terms upset, or not upset, you're not upset, but what kind of terms trigger contestations. For me, I think we should use the word British India when we're talking about the Crown rule from 1857 onwards, but we can talk about it later.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I really welcome those kind of reframing of those paradigms that we're stuck in. So yeah, this is a part of that. Absolutely. Anyone else? So I was kind of going around having a little chat to people. Yeah, go for it. Please, yeah.
I'm really curious that we've got the whole of the South Asia map in front of us because I studied history at SOAS, and I remember one of the key comments that a lot of students had was that we were always studying South Asia, mainly North India, but we never made the comparisons or links between Bangladesh or what's happening in Kashmir. Like Kashmir barely came up. Even Afghanistan and other, Sri Lanka, we barely touched on Sri Lanka either. So I'm really curious about the connections that we can make because it is a whole landmass and the borders are a construct. But yeah, so that's something that just came up for me is that I've never seen us discuss it as an entirety of a region.
Yeah, no, thank you for mentioning that, and definitely felt the disparity between knowledge. Cause I did just desk-based stuff, like desk-based research around what was available for India, Pakistan, and maybe Bangladesh, but the limited amount of sources, resources around Maldives, for example, and Bhutan. There was just a real lack of kind of depth that would have been really welcomed to draw those parallels. And look at those struggles across those borders. So yeah, absolutely. We'll be hopefully touching on some of the other countries as well. I appreciate that the limitation of the panel doesn't mean we represent every single country, but welcome kind of thoughts, from the audience over here as well. Yes, please, over there.
I was just quite struck by the map and reading the display about what Britain did to other parts of the world. It always felt like they had a pattern or a structure, especially how the land is divided up and how particular people groups are displaced or wars happen because how they've cut the land for their own purposes then causes repercussions that we're still living with today. So from somebody who's very interested in Africa, looking at this map, I was very interested, and I didn't know a lot of what was there, even about Afghanistan, I didn't even know that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we're here to draw those similarities out so we can dismantle them collectively, and thank you for that perspective as well. And actually that brings me really nicely into horrifically, the oppressions that we were facing in those spaces. So what I'd like to kind of open with our panelists is, can you name and shame those oppressions that were kind of happening in South Asia? Do you want to start off Saiva, in terms of areas?
I mean, I'm not going to lie. Like, if I started my doctoral research into the partition, and it's kind of what I call the sonic condition of partition, so looking at its oral memory infrastructure, the kind of hegemony of certain archival protocols of power, of who gets to speak, whose voice gets to be in the archive, etc. But then also kind of adding a sort of creative sonic lens to that, so making my own work, remixing, mashing up archival voices, contemporary field recordings, whatever. But when I started my PhD, I wish I saw maps like that you have on the wall today. For me, in 2016, which was before my PhD, when I started thinking about sound and the partition in a more general sense in the context of radio art, on the invitation of a curator in India who wanted to kind of do this audio documentation project for a project of hers that was traveling in different cities in South Asia, including Jaffna in Sri Lanka, Delhi, Lahore in Pakistan, and Dhaka. And at that time in 2016, I was like, wow, this is novel. And now, speaking about all the oppressions of South Asia, like, there's stuff on your exhibition that I didn't know about. So in terms of like you asking me outright, okay, let's talk about all the oppressions of South Asia, I can't.
I think that is the first oppression actually that we need to talk about is the lack of documentation. And you kind of mentioned this, when we spoke previously around how documents were burned, and I wasn't aware about this. So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Right. So my interest in sound and sound studies, which is a very cloistered white and Western sort of sub-discipline of art, I guess, and quite an emerging discipline, let's say, I entered into that world wanting to speak about listening to and with and through partition vis-a-vis the oral histories, right? The problem with sound studies is that people don't really want to listen to voices. They don't know how to, or maybe that's for anthropology or history or something else, because sound artists love to listen to the birds, to nature, to war, whatever, but when it comes to testimony, it's a tricky thing, It's like, oh, that's not really for us, that's more for, somebody at SOAS. So when I started, my interest in oral memory and oral history and the boom that's happened in the last 2 decades, considering that there was I'm old enough to remember when there was such a taboo about partition, when nobody was speaking about it, there wasn't an archive, there wasn't a museum, it wasn't seen as British history. Now, on the completion of my research, it's seen as British history. There's a partition museum in India. There's a decolonial turn that connects the 1947 to decolonization, not just in the subcontinent, but across Asia and Africa. And in my first or second year, I came across this book by Ian Cobain, who was a former Guardian journalist, who I really recommend. It's a very easy to read book called The Secret Empire or something. It's about the history of this country is a master at secrets. And when that decolonization period happened between 1947 until, I guess, the 60s and 70s, in Asia and Africa, what happened was in every single territory, the British government was supposed to hand over documents over to the new independent governments. Instead, they burnt most of them, to the extent where in Delhi in August 1947, when there was so much else going on, there was a bonfire of documents outside the government building that journalists were reporting lasted. There were so many documents that there was a pall of smoke for days. And this image, I couldn't get this image of the pall of smoke above my mind, It's not mosques burning, it's not temples, it's not people killing each other as we have these tropes and this kind of mainstream memory of partition, which is like people turning on each other, these perennially divided societies. Actually, the smoke was coming from burning colonial documents. The documents that they didn't burn, they sequestered and shipped to the UK. Many of them remain here, not in the National Archives where they should be. Now, I'm not saying that they should be in the National, but logically they should be in the National Archives. Rather, these documents are held in secret archives outside of London in a place called Hanslope Park. they're kind of accessible. I don't want to exaggerate and say, oh my God, it's like a fortress and you can't get in. You can actually get in, and actually a lot of the stuff that they did not burn is not that interesting. They burnt the interesting stuff. They also burnt documents in Palestine in 1948 when Palestine was partitioned. In Ceylon in 1948, documents were burnt. Because the fires were creating such a furore among the media, they built special incinerators so they could burn them indoors. So in Malaysia, in British Malay, they also burnt documents there in 1949 or 50, I think. So when I came across this book, which is not sound art, it's not history, it's not partition studies, it's the guy literally talking about the history of British state secrets. For me, that was like, okay, this is the beginning. It's not the divide and rule, it's not the Hindu-Muslim thing, it's not, the lines drawn, the Radcliffe line or whatever. It's this destruction, mass destruction of documents, not just in the subcontinent. And what happens when the written, which is so important to historical research, which has so much primacy in most academic and even, just sort of cultural fields, when you don't have that, and when sound remains, what does that mean? So that was my starting point into the archival, I guess, which is archival destruction rather than sort of going into these sexy archives and seeing, loads of documents and stuff, like you would here in the National Archives, for example. So.
Yeah, and I think I'd really recommend people to dig into partition listening to hear the kind of voices that Simon's been collecting who are able to bring that oral history to life. Tasneem, I was wondering, what was your experience like trying to draw parallels between, kind of what had happened in Bengal pre-partition, during the partition, and then subsequent kind of tragedies around 1971, for example?
I think for me, I've always been interested in how we got somewhere. I think even as people, my parents are from Bangladesh, so I'm Bangladeshi, so I think I was always interested in how even me being in the UK, like being a citizen of the UK, like how is that different to, people back home? And what is this category of like citizen that we've, been given, and, is based on the premise of excluding a whole other people? That is why a citizen, what even is the category of citizen, basically? That's how I started, I guess, everything I was trying to do. I think it's the ongoing Rohingya genocide that really made me question all these categories of citizenship. But there's always a start with everything. And I think with the more I was looking into the Rohingya genocide, especially because the Rohingyas have been called, or they've been racialized as Bangladeshis, foreigners, illegal immigrants. And you kind of see that as well during the 1971 genocide. We were still othered in different ways. We were still racialized, and that racialization basically was the reason why we were seen as inferior, we were looked down upon. And then I guess seeing the current, what's going on right now in Myanmar with the Rohingya people, I saw the similarities there. And then if you go to Assam in India, so a lot of people don't know, but Assam is a northeastern state in India, and Sylhet, a part of Bangladesh where I'm from. During colonial times, there was no border between Sylhet and Assam. Sylhet and Assam were next door to each other, yeah. And a lot of facilities that I know, their grandparents, graves and stuff are in Assam. I think there was a lot of business between those areas. So then I was really interested in the fact that how from one night, all these groups of people that were in Assam just turned into foreigners, and how all those, mainly in Assam especially, that category, that community is again, has been used against ethnically Bengali people. And again, that racialization is really what connected all these things together, for me anyway. And that's when, I guess, when I started tracing back, it was the category of citizenship that really, I feel like, is one of the ongoing colonial violences that we see across post-colonial states, from Palestine to even current day now Assam, what is going on over there.
Definitely, that parallel between, it's almost like India looked at the textbook case of what was happening in Rakhine province with the Rohingya refugees and how a overruling of their law meant that they couldn't stay there anymore. They had to then move into kind of Bangladesh and kind of towards India. And actually they're being pushed. It's almost like a pincer movement of colonial oppressions on either side against kind of ethnicities. And borders are often used in that kind of pincer movement. On this side, with Pakistan, Afghanistan, with the Durand line, you mentioned kind of the different ethnicities that are being left behind there. What kind of impact did that have then, and what kind of impact does it have now?
Do you mean 1947?
Yes.
Yeah, I can't speak so much on Afghanistan and the Durand line, unfortunately. Even though my parents did meet in Peshawar, which is kind of very close, and my parents speak Pashto, even though they're Urdu-speaking Mahajirs, which I think is quite a rare thing, just because they both grew up there. But what I can say to that, maybe in terms of that citizenship point that Taz brought up, at the moment, what's happening in Pakistan and the policy now to kick out Afghan refugees, which started last autumn, actually just before October 7th, they announced that they were doing this. So police are going through Pakistani cities to kind of clean up informal sort of Afghan settlements, businesses that have been there for generations, actually, and harassing, raiding, and arresting communities. For me, considering that during the war on terror, which I think is something that we should be speaking more about, and that is kind of history now, but the idea that, Pakistan was hosting so many Afghan refugees and the Musharraf government at the time was very proud of that fact, and they were like, they are our brothers and sisters, we are the same people. And even until recently, Imran Khan, unfortunately now he's in jail, but he was, he wanted to open the corridor, he wanted a visa-free program, etc. And now it's switched to the point where Pakistanis, middle-class Pakistanis here and there, who cry when boatloads of Pakistanis sink in the Mediterranean, are now sort of baiting for the sort of displacement and exclusion of Afghans, calling them profiteers, calling them terrorists, and that is the way in which the media and the government has turned Pakistani people, as I've seen it, against Afghans. So for me, this is in terms of this ongoing exclusion. That was also a porous border. The Khyber Pass was a porous border in a similar way, I think, to Assam and Bengal. But I can't speak about the Durand line, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I think that paints a picture of actually what's going on across at least I can speak to India as well, around NRCCA affecting Bangladeshi, but also Nepali people caught in that crossfire. They had treaties that allowed freedom of movement, especially for labour, and then as a result of the NRCCA asking a country where documentation is not a priority for people, where documentation has been either burned or lost in floods, or kind of just in the erosion of not just natural disasters, but the bureaucratic administration erosion of those evidential papers, means that a lot of people are considered stateless, and that kind of tier of citizenship, Tasneema, that you kind of call to is being kind of eroded. That's a really good question. I'm going to ask Tasneema that.
So the NRC is the National Register of Citizens, and the CAA is
Citizenship Amendment Act.
That's it. So the NRC, that is something that I was looking into a lot when I was advocating against citizenship deprivation. So I feel like the best way to break it down is like it's a legal process of, and it's a register of names that they say are non-foreigners. And it's basically like in England, if they, want to see who was, when did we like all, it's a sentence, but it's like, when did we all migrate? And like tracing it back to like our granddads. And if our granddad had land here, then, you're on the list. And it was kind of, so in India at that time, 2019, the Supreme Court took it over because in Assam for the last decades, actually, like there's been ongoing pogroms, killings, mass displacement of Bengalis within Assam. There's been movements and actually been student movements against foreigners, and it's been against Bengalis within Assam. And obviously in India as well, when people hear Bengali, Bangladeshi, it's attributed to foreigner and Muslim and other, basically. So yeah, the NRC process is.
There were also detention camps set up, sort of first secret, really inhumane detention camps.
Yeah, I think there's like 7 or 8 detention camps in Assam, and when I actually went to Assam in 2019, it was quite mad. They had like detained kids and also like really elderly women because they couldn't find their papers, and these are papers that most people wouldn't have, and especially the biggest thing as well is most people within that that are being called foreigners and stuff, they are all poor. Like, no, there are middle-class Bengalis, middle-class Muslims in Assam, and they're not affected because they might have their papers or whatnot. But and climate change is actually one of the reasons why this was all being brought to light, because there's a lot of mini islands within Assam, and those were settlements for Bengali refugees after 1971. And in the last few years, they've been flooded, and all these refugees had to come to like the mainland Assam, and that also brought up like a whole other thing, like where did these people come from? They only just came around the corner, and things like that. But yeah, in 2019, 1.9 million people were left off the NRC list, which means that they've been deprived of Indian nationality, Indian citizenship. And it's a very, very long process to try and appeal it. Most people won't be able to afford legal help like that. And yeah, it is, in Assam as well, it is sometimes the kind of difference between life or death.
Yeah, you can get told the day before that you've got a court date halfway across, the state, which could take days to get to, and you have whole families selling their belongings to get on to, arranging transport to make this happen. It's the unfairness and injustice, of the process is just really stark. I think what's really interesting is you mentioned that there's a class kind of, socioeconomic divide happening there, but also there is religious divide also happening around trying to create voter banks, right? Trying to consolidate these territories as election territories. Can you speak to the divisions being kind of wrought between religions?
So what I saw, one of the biggest divides was between the 1.9 million people that had been deprived of citizens, and within that list there were Hindus and there were also Muslims as well. And so majority of these, this community were left what was then East Pakistan during the Liberation War, and they left to the neighboring country. And the divide is that obviously the CAA came in, Citizenship Amendment Act, and so if I'm not mistaken as well, this is the act that granted citizenship to all religions except from Muslims and
So yeah, can I jump in?
Yeah.
Because when the CAA, which came in after the NRC, came in, basically India opened up citizenship to people of all religions from its neighboring countries, except Muslims. So if you're Buddhist, if you're a Hindu, if you're a Christian from Pakistan, from Afghanistan, from Bangladesh, you can come in and become and get status. Is it refugee status or citizenship status? Citizenship status.
I think it's refugee status.
Refugee status. Sorry, refugee status. But Muslims were excluded. Tamil Sri Lankan Tamils living in India were excluded, and Tibetans, I think, were excluded. I think people from Tibet were also excluded from that bill.
And yeah, so you saw this divide going on as well, because at that time, the CAA basically meant that all the people excluded from the NRC, they were trying to calm them down, basically saying, you can apply for this act, you'll be fine. It was nothing for the majority that are Muslims within that list. And you can see the divide already. A lot of the Hindu Bengalis that I spoke to as well, they were going to support the local BJP because they are trying to do the CAA Act, and that will help them. And you can't fault people in desperate situations. Like, this is really the difference between getting detained for years on end, or or not, basically. And a lot of fear-mongering and stuff was going on, but that really divided the whole, the ethnic minorities within Assam. Because they knew, obviously, that's what you have to do. You have to split.
It's using the tools of the oppressor, right?
Yeah.
So using the divide and rule tactics, which also brings me onto Kashmir, actually. For a friend who is a maps expert in the room, he'll probably cringe at the injustice that we've done to Kashmir by shoehorning it there. But it's a really big issue, and actually election, well, actually, to consolidate election wins, Modi's got a report card where he's like, Mandar bana diya. So I've made mandar on the site of the Babri Masjid Mosque. I will deal with immigration, in Assam, and Kashmir is seen as another win on his report card. Are you able to speak a little bit about Kashmir a bit?
Sorry, I don't want to keep saying no, I can't speak.
Okay.
But no, I can't speak.
But you speak so brilliantly when you do.
What I can say about Kashmir is that I think that it's been severely, severely underrepresented, similarly to Palestine, actually, and actually with similar, in terms of like legal occupation, similar circumstances, especially since the annexation in 2019. That's what I can say about Kashmir. I don't know about Kashmir. I can recommend an amazing book on Kashmir by a friend called Atazia. She's a poet and anthropologist. She's written a book actually published in 2019 called Disappearances, and I think it's Women's Resistance and Disappearance in Kashmir. So she's spent a lot of time with women from an association called the ADBT, which is like the Association for the Disappeared Persons. Basically, they're a collection of women who have lost their fathers and sons and brothers to state disappearances, often known to the families, so they know who's abducted and killed their sons or fathers. And that book is really incredible because what she does is speak about the possibility of speaking and the possibility of these women, the possibility of them being heard. These women do regularly public performative protest displays in the main square in Jammu when they can, when they're allowed, when they're not fired on, with photos of their loved ones. And there's kind of like a sort of performative repetition of these women going week after week or month after month to the same place with the same photographs, with the same journalists crying the same tears, And she speaks about the sort of labor of that performance and the repetition, and also the idea that some of these women are forced to, because they want justice and because there is a certain international eye on them, as in, feminist Indians and journalists from Delhi will come to speak to them, and they are forced to speak to these people. They call them the Governor Raj or something. I think that's the colloquial term for people who come from, we have to speak to the governor, But her experiences of trying to do interviews with them, they show her ire, because she's a fellow Kashmiri, and they can refuse to speak to her. And for Atazia, she spoke to me quite beautifully about this feeling of having doors slammed in her face by these women who are suffering immense, because when a loved one has disappeared, you do not ever really have justice. That's been denied for you forever. That closure has been denied for you forever. So the fact that a Kashmiri woman can slam the door in her face, for her is kind of an honor, because they must speak to the Indian journalists, they must speak to the NGOs who come from Pakistan, they must, they have to kind of, so it's really interesting the way that she speaks about women's narratives and the upkeep of that activism. So that's what I can say in Kashmir.
And actually that brings me on to something that we touched on a little bit earlier about like kind of history and a dialogue. Often there is a dialogue kind of around colonialism and was the empire a good thing? That's an often, a question that gets raised in British circles, as if there is no need for a dialogue with those that were colonized around the world, 2.5 billion. You've kind of written and thought about a lot about history and narrative and who gets to, kind of, do we get closure? Is the question that I have.
I think, I don't want to be too academic, but I think the whole struggle and challenge that I gave myself for my thesis was that, partition is not an event closed in time and space in the past. But I followed, there's a great kind of critical theorist and queer theorist called Madhavi Menon, who writes mostly on Shakespeare, actually, but she wrote this great paper on partition and describes it as a condition within which we all labor. And that sort of started off my kind of introduction, and I was like, okay, what do you mean by labor? And actually what I'm finding with my encounter with partition is that it's a labor of listening, because I'm in the oral archive, because it's no written documents, only testimonies, but this is what we have, and these archives and memory projects and museums and art initiatives and academic exchanges and blah, 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 have only been happening in the last 10, 15 years, and sort of restoring that history for us. But I found it, I do argue that this is done in a very nostalgic, sentimental way in which, I kind of see the colonial archival regime and this new kind of post-colonial partition archive as part of the same continuum, right? And there's many differences between them, of course, but the idea that partition has been sort of, at least I'm speaking as a British Pakistani, diaspora, blah, blah, but my growing up and to be told, on the one hand, we can't really speak about partition. On the other hand, that's our origin story, And I think that's a strange contradiction, because this trope of silence also comes through. We all know, there's so many books on partition. It's like silence, silence, breaking the silence, the other side of silence. There was this play in December 2022, which was using the archival voices of partition that was deposited in the British Library by Kavita Puri, I think, which is a BBC journalist who did a broadcast on those same interviews. And I was really interested in the fact that, okay, so these are interviews done for a radio program that ends up in a national archive, and then I saw a play which reperforms those testimonies, And so it almost becomes like this fictive traveling, and then you wonder, you question, wait, I've heard this before. Was that in so-and-so's book? Oh, did I hear that in the archive, or is that just like a myth? There's many tropes, I don't want to be academic and go into massive detail, but there's certain stories, there's certain tropes, like you talk about the train, When you talk to to British people about trains, there's this gleam in their eye. Oh, we gave them the trains. Because they wouldn't have had them without
Take the trains
empire,
back. It's fine.
And so, and so there's this brilliant oral historian, Aninja Ray Chowdhury, he's in Scotland, who talks about the train space in partition stories. And he's done interviews. He was lucky enough, he was one of the few people who can actually travel to India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan for his research, or he managed to in the 2015 or something. and he was listening to stories of the train, and he was like, wait a minute, this was in that film, you know? So I'm very interested in these, like, you know, these, like, I'm speaking about sound, but there is these continually repeated tropes and metaphors and visual metaphors that, again, you know, why are we talking about the train?
Yeah.
Like,
Let's get off the train.
yeah, you know. So, sorry,
hear
I'm
you.
rambling, but
No.
Yeah.
I hear you absolutely, and I think the narratives and the tropes and the cliches are really important, because that is what is telling us that the work of decolonialism isn't done. It's not yet successful, right? The decolonizing, although it's been mainstreamed, is not a finished project. We're not getting closure on this because it's not done in the right way. So I'm just wanted to end on the note of the psychology of colonialism. And when I was reading this, it kind of brought shivers to my kind of being. Basically, the idea that there is a colonizer who accepts colonialism, right? This is the person that shifts their humanity to accept, you know, the brutalism, the genocide, the violence and the terror, and is happy to validate that in other parts of the world also. We're seeing a coalition of those sentiments, right? There is a colonizer who rejects the process of colonization. This is what you see as the ally, you know, the person who says, that wasn't me, but, you know, unfortunately, it's not an individual choice. We all kind of benefit with our proximity to whiteness. And even as, you know, POC here, our proximity to whiteness does mean that we are part of it. Then there is the colonizer who, the colonized that accepts. And we know what those people look like. You know, that's your Priti Patel who's, you know, who's trying to assimilate, but is on a failed mission, because you cannot assimilate. It's a failed mission from the very start. And then you have the colonizer that rejects. And I imagine that people in this room are full of that rejection, that, you know, this is not our history, this is not our past, and this is, you know, something that we have the opportunity to reshape. And I think that requires, you know, a breaking of those narratives and tropes and stereotypes around what we have been told that we are, lazy or unpunctual, whatever, all these things, and redefine those, rebirth the cultures, reconnect with our languages to continue the decolonial process. I'm going to end there. Thank you so much for being patient with me. There was one perhaps question towards the end.
Saima, I admire your metaphor of the train, because there are any number of people sitting in Delhi thanking the Angrez for giving us the trains. And they're sitting in the Gymkhana Club, and they work in the civil service, and they will bust a gut to make sure that their children and grandchildren only speak English, unless they're shouting at the servants. We are the colonized. They've got us. With a fourth or fifth generation, they've got us.
Yeah, there was a witnessing of like an assimilation to a globalized identity, right? And that kind of goes in hand with the capitalism that was brought in, you know, so extensively through colonialism. I'm going to kind of wrap up there and just mention that on the screen, little trigger warning, there will be some images that may be slightly unsettling. They are parallels that we are drawing between oppressions in South Asia and the oppressions of Israel. And we encourage you, if you have a moment, would like to talk about resistances. Where are you starting to see resistances? Whether you want to walk around, pick up some resistances on the floor or from the maps. Have a little connect the dots moment. But thank you so much. And feel free to have a little break.
Yeah, we'll go into a break. Please give a massive round of applause to Tasneema, Saima, and to our lovely host over here as well. Thank you so much, everyone. They will be back. They'll be back with myself and Ishri, who'll be joining after the 10-minute break to talk a little bit about the resistances and what it means here in the diaspora in the UK specifically. So please feel free to engage with each other. If Elliot in a second is just going to change the slides, so just take a moment to look through the next couple of slides, and then the last one will have a prompt on it for you to have a conversation next with the person next to you or with someone you find cute, maybe.
तेरा पिंजरा मजाल निखाना परिंदे आने उड़ जाना तेरा पिंजरा तेरा
We might be ready. If our panelists would like to join us on the front seats, make yourselves comfortable. Just doing the water job. Give it up for our panelists, please. Woo! Okay, you've got a bit of water left. You've got some water. Oh, you've got some water. All right, I'll leave this here for you then. Okay. Who's this new character on our stage? Thank you so much for still being here with us. We really appreciate it. How's everyone feeling? Yeah? Good. Good. Okay, good. Just sense checking that. The new face. Would you like to introduce yourself, Ishri, please?
I'm Ishri. My pronouns are she, her. I'm like a last-minute replacement for Suresh. So I'm representing West London here as we talk about UK resistances and resistances in London. So Suresh Grover was one of the founders and leaders of the Southall Youth Movement, and he would have been here to kind of talk about what it was like in West London in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and as well as across the country, because he worked with the Asian youth movement across London and then across the UK. So I work as an archivist and researcher, and I record oral histories for the local borough of Hounslow in Ealing, which is Heathrow Airport, just as a reference, because no one knows where Hounslow is in life. And yeah, so we work with working class stories and oral histories, and particularly migrant stories and histories, and about how we've ended up in these two boroughs and how to preserve and talk about our histories with care and delicacy, and also just like respect, because a lot of the people who we talk to, especially our elders, don't think they're deserving of being in a museum or in an archive. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you, Ishri, for joining us. She is also my little sister. Not genetically, but, you know. And so I'd like to ask the question around the depoliticization of the South Asian diaspora, whatever that represents. And is there a reason, in your opinion, that there's a difference between generationally what that represents as well here in the diaspora? I'll pass over to the far end, maybe Tasneem, if you want to take that first, or Saima, how you feel comfortable. Why has there been a depoliticization of South Asians, and is there a generational difference in your opinion?
If you can start, actually, and I'll just...
Yeah.
Feel free to take it where you want to.
Loaded question.
Yeah, depoliticization. I mean, for me, I think earlier we were talking about sort of proximity to sort of whiteness, and I think that probably has a big role to play, and that's not a new thing. And I think the migrant communities who've come to the UK since the 50s and 60s from all across, particularly the Commonwealth in countries in Asia and Africa, probably I haven't researched this, but I do feel that they're, in terms of even just urban segregation and sort of labor priorities and housing and stuff like that, that there is an inbuilt sort of divide and rule that was replicated here. So the idea that South Asians are depoliticized, I mean, first of all, I'm really not sure about the word South Asian anymore. I was just saying to my friends earlier that South Asia is actually a term with quite a murky history, and it seems to have been invented by Orientalist CIA people at the beginning of the Cold War to demarcate this region in the context of, you know, geopolitical seismic change. But to talk about here, I mean, for me, like, we can speak, what comes to my mind are the people who are, like, leading us at the moment, and the sort of Brahmin supremacy, maybe, that British politics has seen in the last few years. And that is aligned very deeply with a long-term, even pre-9/11 Islamophobia in this country that does pit Muslims against non-Muslims against Muslims. So I don't know. Maybe has that given you time to think?
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. So I think also on the category of South Asian, so I'm involved in, I would say, community organising, especially within Bangladeshi Bengali communities, South Asian communities, working class communities in general. And I feel like we use South Asian as a politics and not a place. And we trace back, when we say South Asian, we're tracing back the histories of resistance. There's a lot of reasons why, we don't know a lot about them, but, even in terms of South Asia and Palestine, it was such a central point, the Palestinian struggle, to different South Asian liberation struggles across the subcontinent. You have Prime Minister Nehru, Indian Prime Minister, who was central in some of the UN conventions that we have supporting Palestinian, not just struggle, but also resistance. And then also with Bangladeshi's 1967 Lebanon war, we had thousands of Bangladeshi fighters going to Lebanon to fight with the Palestinian Liberation, PLO. And a lot of Bangladeshis died there for the Palestinian struggle. So there is if you're looking at it now and you see the normalization of Israel, especially from India, but also you have Bangladesh, who I think it's tech supplies or something like that, military supplies they have with Israel. The continuous normalization, it wasn't like that. And so for me, and I feel like for a lot of people that are in the diaspora, when we use South Asian, we are using it as a term to trace back all these histories, and also then looking at how, because I feel like, so in terms of depoliticization, the war on terror, Islamophobia, you also got austerity, it's, we've been 10, 15 years, whatever, under conservative rule, but also, during Tony Blair, he was the first person that created the amendment in the citizenship laws in the UK that basically meant you can deprive citizenship if they're not doing good in the public or something like that. And he, created those laws for one person, and that was a Muslim preacher at that time. But you get kind of this timeline, and it's what is coming out of the ruling class is citizenship is a privilege for us, and it's we are no longer. We should be privileged to be here. Whatever comes that way.
It's conditional.
Yeah, it's conditional, and we see that. Obviously, we see that years ago with Shamima Begum, but you see that over the last decades. Shamima Begum wasn't the first. It was being Muslims that have been deprived of their citizenship, and it's a lot of fear as well. Our mums and dads, a lot of them just came here because they were for economic, whatever that means, for economic reasons, or refugees or whatnot. So it's their position in the UK is conditional. Yeah, and I feel like all of these things together. Also, I feel like, so in the 60s and 70s, when there was Asian youth movements going on, in East London, the Bangladeshi Youth Front, the Bangladeshi youth movements, and one of the actual key reasons why kind of integrated these really radical youth movements at that time is because they got co-opted by the local Labour Party.
Jokes.
Yeah. So even today, I feel like when people talk about politics and how to engage in politics, it's very like dominated by party politics. And you know, in the 1670s, there was just this whole radical space of India worker solidarity, who invited Malcolm X to Birmingham, Smethwick, near that. And you have all this radical history that most of us growing up, like you really have to look into it.
Really do, yeah.
So I feel like, yeah.
There's so much there, and actually, one of the things I'll pass to you in a second, Ishri, Amrit Wilson, who is academic and spoke at the teach-in that Nija Manoush did with the Rights Collective in December, a couple of us went along to. She speaks about the political imprisonment of what the BJP are doing in India and in the diaspora here, and actually she focuses a lot of her efforts on what it looks like here in the diaspora and how actually the BJP, which is this kind of just machine of, in a sense, they take inspiration from Zionism in many ways, actually, and Amrit Wilson speaks really extensively on that. And actually in the diaspora, it's so clear in my community of I'm Hindu Gujarati. It's very, very clear where the Islamophobia is coming from, and it's almost like like robotic, like glazed eyes, like must follow protocol, must follow what Modi says, like da 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 da, like that, and that's just like mind-boggling to me that. We've got people here in the 70s and the 80s who have been working for workers' rights here in the UK and, campaigning as part of these movements like that, like you say, are not just political party movements, but actually taking to the streets and acting on making noise and making a difference. And yeah, I just also wanted to ask you to maybe name drop some of those communities that you were talking about, Tasneema, when you said you're part of those communities, and then I'll pass to Ishri as well.
What do you mean?
Like Nija Manoush.
Oh, right. So I'm one of the co-founders of Nija Manoush. We are a campaigning organisation that I think the central reason why we were formed was because of the inspiration that we got from past Asian youth movements, and we wanted to create this radical space that people can engage in and, campaign for things that were happening in their own neighbourhoods. And I feel like, so that's Nija Manoush. And then me and my friends also, we started the Nejma Collective, and we are a group of Muslim volunteers, and we campaign for Muslims in prison. So I think... so when you're talking about the war on terror as well, I think it's so crazy to think about how much it's affected everything, and also how it is really a machine to justify also the killings abroad. That is how Palestine, we got here today, and what we saw in the last 100 days is also because in the UK we haven't been confronting Shamima Begum, for example. Even now, if diaspora are up in arms about what happened to Shamima Begum, I think it's more because they're seeing how it's made their status conditional, instead of actually questioning the actual premise of what was going on at that time. And I think, I'm very interested as well about how we've created this, label of terrorism that we haven't been questioning, so much so that, if we hear that terrorists have been killed abroad, that's okay, that's a good thing. There's no question about it, and if you do question it, you're probably aligned with them or some shit like that. Even though the UK, US, all they do is talk about the rule of law and how, due process, and people, if they're accused of criminality, you have to prove it. But it's like when it's terrorists abroad, and I think for America, they label terrorists in their little policy as well as anybody that's a 16-year-old male and above is what is deemed that. So a lot of these things were happening in the UK over the last decades, even with the Tony Blair Amendment and the Hamza Amendment. And because these people were unpopular, and these were like, the media created mass hysteria over how, all these terrorists, all these people, and then so when those rights were eroded, nobody questioned them. And when one person's right is eroded, even if it takes 10 or 20 years, that's gonna affect our rights, and it has.
Yeah, totally. Ishri, I'll pass to you on the same question. What's coming up for you?
I think when I'll speak for Southall, not so much myself. Southall has and always been a radical place and movement. And when I say they were radical, I mean they were throwing petrol bombs, and they took large inspiration from the Black Panther movement in America and formed bands and would walk people to work because they were National Front members harassing elderly women trying to go to factories. They would protect funerals. They organized marches and demolitions, and they were incredibly radical young people in their 20s who were defying their parents, who were telling them, especially the girls among them, were who's going to marry you if you do this? And, and also the same anxieties and things that I get from my parents would be you shouldn't be out there, and this is bad for you, and, you should look after yourself. And this individualism that was really born straight after this moment. And we, as we talk about South Asia, everyone didn't experience colonialism in the same way. And so that when you come here, you are bringing your experience of what it means to be colonized with you. And for Priti Patels and those who came from Kenya and Uganda and had money, to them it was not a fight for collectiveness, it was a fight for individuality and to rebuild the wealth that they felt were unjustly lost, even though they were helping colonize a different land in Africa. And that kind of mentality hasn't been lost among us, and you see it in how we're not this collective, united movement that we all want to believe that we are, and in the way that in a lot of academic white circles, they just like to throw us all into one and believe that we are. And I think in Southall, that's the biggest struggle, because it's called Little India, but inherently it's a Punjabi community. In the 1950s, the first people that came were Punjabi workers, and they were men who had fought for the British Army, and because at Wolf's Rubbers there was a British sergeant who believed that, okay, they work really hard and they're docile, they'll come here and be docile too. Right. And so in bringing the Punjabi workers over, it then opened the floodgates for other South Asians who then felt okay, this is a safe place, this is a factories here, we can all work here. And with that became the terror of the white people who are kind of you're taking everything, and they're going to take our jobs, and they're going to take our land, and can then build their own movements to fight back. And that's where you get these really young National Front members that were egged on by a lot of older people. And you see them become, and those people in the 1950s and 60s, 70s who are majority Punjabi community, and I say that because the Punjabi community has always, and I'm not Punjabi, but the Punjabi community have a strong moral ethic value about how they fight for other people. And that, when you talk to them, that was a big part of what. And they have their own problems now, and they'll talk about their own, even though they're born out of anti-casteism, we'll talk about how that's kind of become a new problem for them now in this current community. Southall now, that history isn't talked about. I grew up in Heston, which is 10 minutes away. It's not talked about in our primary schools, it's not talked about in our secondary schools. If you don't know why you live in your community, you don't understand why it's created, you don't get a chance to appreciate it. Yeah. And so growing up in Hounslow and Southall, it's kind of shit because there's nothing happening. It's an immigrant neighborhood where nothing fun happens, and your aunties and uncles are everywhere to tell on you. And so you don't actually want to be there, right? So you're oh, I want to leave, this place is the worst. But and I had that moment where I was I hate here. And you leave, and I was wait, it's not normal to go to a school and have people who speak multiple different languages from the same part of a continent as you. It's not normal to be able to swear in your own language and other people get it. Most of the times you are the other. And so that was created because of the fights that happened in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so what Southall is working towards now is through the Southall Community Alliance, there's been this sudden realization with this hyper gentrification that's happening there because of the Elizabeth line, which has really woken up Suresh Grover and those people in their 40s and their 50s who are kind of realizing that this community that we built and our parents built might actually disappear, and our history hasn't been taught. We haven't told it to our next generation. So I'm now working with schools in the local community, and they do primary school and secondary school sessions to tell them. So they'll have photos. Suresh Grover will go there as like an eyewitness, and he'll tell like the personal stories of what it's like to have walked on those marches and how many police were on the street. And because it's their neighborhood, they can really imagine it. So when they say like there were 3,500 policemen on like 1,000 on horseback on Southport Broadway, and you know how small Southport Broadway is, you're like, that's mad. Like, that's not possible. And I think that's their biggest focus at the moment, is between that and like reunifying what Southport looks like, because it doesn't have that politicization anymore. It doesn't have that unity because it's so like separated from that time period, and we have it's much differently ethnically, right?
Yeah,
we
and
have
you talk about the gentrification making everything the same, right? So it's,
like I did this as part of my dissertation, where you look at like the design of gentrification, and when you look at their like projection models of what the area should look like, and they did one for Southport Broadway, none of the shops are there. It's like these empty, grey, cold buildings where none of these places exist. And if you talk to them about it, they won't talk about the community that's there. And when I say like the gentrification is happening, like Southport Station is here, the biggest gentrification block by the Berkeley Group is there, and then the whole of Southport Broadway is there. And so to not put it in your pictures and not talk about it is that you don't expect it to be there in 20 years. Like, you're wishing for the active removal of all of those people, because then you can put a Pret in a Tesco's. And at the moment, there's no Pret in Tesco's in Southport. and like, we're hoping it stays that way, because we don't need any more. No. So like, at the moment, that's Southport's biggest battle. And figuring out how to work together when we haven't had to do that in such a long time, and also re-engaging a generation that's kind of run away because they haven't had good experiences with their own community.
wow. Yeah, there's so much there. Loving it, speak on it. I'm thinking about, well, we've spoken quite a lot about the oppressions, and I know the first panel focused a lot on that. I guess I'm curious as to, in your opinion, what have been some of the biggest resistant movements in the UK, and also is there a global interconnectedness with them? I guess I'm thinking more about the workers' rights, and then also the kind of, we can go towards the gentrification again as well. But if anyone would like to go on that first. Blank faces.
So the first uprising in Southport, and I don't like calling them riots because the local community doesn't like calling it riots. The people who lived it don't like it being called riots. And they were called riots at the time so that in the newspapers they could be
Where does that word come from?
These like crazy, savage people are attacking the local people. And so it was in 1976 after Gurdeep Singh Chuggar died. He was a 15-year-old boy who was stabbed by the National Front. And after his death, that was the first series of protests that happened in Southport in kind of reaction to that, and that was out of the aggressive violence. And like just around the same time, you have like the Indian Workers Association, who then take wharf robbers because they realise how little they're being paid, but also how completely unsafe the working conditions are. And then at that same time, you have the gunwork strikes, and then in 1979 is the biggest march, where you have the 3,500 policemen on horseback with literally just like, there's like elderly people and kids, and they're all in the street because the local National Front group decided they wanted to use Southport Town Hall, but the people in Southport didn't want them to. And you have 3,000 police officers protecting about 20 National Front members who are doing Heil Hitler signs as they walk into the town hall. And in that moment, you see so at that time, you'll see, if you research it, and in the posters you see there, you'll see that a lot of the movements at the time would describe themselves as black. So you use black as as a political term. So even though they weren't physically appearance black, they aligned themselves with the Black Panther movement and then would be like, we are one race, and therefore I align myself with every other movement of racism.
There are it's evolved so much since
Yeah.
then, hasn't it, in terms
Yeah.
of the differences between our communities. I mean, even if we look at South Asia in the conversation we're having, there are so many polarities and differences in the experiences, like you say, Ishwari, about, not one person from South Asia has had the same kind of lineage or experience. And so when we bring that here, and that's true for the differences between even the global majority here in the UK and the differences, I think, Prabhjit spoke about it, about our proximity to whiteness as brown folks, and actually the plight of being dark-skinned, black, and a woman or trans or disabled, and what that represents. So I think, totally agree on that. I'll just pass to Tasneema. Do you have something to say?
When I was listening to you, all I was like, in my head was just all these parallels, right? Because at that time, the 15-year-old was killed by National Front. And then you have Al-Tabali that was killed on Brick Lane, a garment worker. And you have other spaces like this. And it's crazy to look back, because so you have the Southall youth movements, and then you have the kind of the Bangladeshi youth movements going on in East London. Then you have, in the northern part of the UK, you have the Bradford 12, who... all these different groups that was like actually so radical at that time. And then I think also, because you said they used to define themselves as politically black, and I'm not here to debate the advantages, disadvantages of that now, because I think unfortunately I don't think that's a term that we can really bank on right now. But there was a reason for it being used in the 70s, and it was the reason why all these groups together led the first black worker strike. And they were doing the same fight in all these different parts of the UK. And I think that's something we have to confront as well in the UK, that we are all so divided now. It's not, back then they had a political term to unite all of them, and there was a reason for that. There was like an ideological reason for that. They were, third world, internationalists as well, socialists as well. And I feel like we don't have that space now. We don't have that unifying, reason that we need to be unified, because even your fight in Southall, it's going on in Tower Hamlets. It's like, and, Tower Hamlets is the most gentrified borough in London, according to Runnymede Trust report. And, say Brick Lane campaign, we say it's one of the last kind of remaining spots that is not, full of grey buildings, basically. All these kind of fights are going on, and now I think is about gentrification. You got Save Latin Village, you got Elephant Castle, you have Save Nor, you have
Got Ladbroke Grove and the Grenfell campaign and all of that.
Yeah, and I feel like I think so with Nigel Manush, Nigel Manush means incility as well. It means our own people.
Wow.
But we use it as a political term. We don't say our own people as in on ethnic lines. We use it as our own people if you have the same politics as us. And, I think what's been really amazing to see over the last few years is that all our spaces, it's never just one ethnicity. Even say Brick Lane campaign and the coalition of 8 organizations, it's very diverse coalition of groups. You got heritage groups, and then you got Nigel Manush as well. And I feel like so many of these fights are going on basically, and I feel like I don't know. I look back at 70s, 80s. I look back. I wasn't alive then, but I read about it, and I'm just thinking they were all so trading. What's going on in there? What's going on if we needed help here? You know, we had the National Front
Share
as well here.
resources.
Yeah, you know, 3,000 after Al Tabali died, 3,000 people got his coffin and marched down outside Downing Street.
The park is named after, is that the park that's towards Mile End?
Yeah.
Because I lived up that way for a bit and I saw there's an Aftab Park or something, and then on there is all these details about that march that happened.
Yeah.
And that was my first time seeing it.
And those
hearing it.
3,000 people were not just, you know, Bengali people. There were people that were like from all over the UK that were like, you know, and that was so radical, like literally marching down his coffin to Parliament. And you just don't see that nowadays, and it is because of, I feel like, individualism as well. Also, the law, how it's been used to kind of obstruct us, to make us all fear that, you know, we're all gonna go jail if we try to do that now or something like that. Like, even with the squatting movement, so Bengali squatters in Tower Hamlets, a lot of council houses and council estates in Tower Hamlets is because there were derelict buildings and Bengali families would go and squat there, and they wouldn't leave until the council was forced to give them that estate and that house. And a lot of, you know, those histories and stuff are, you know, not known about, but that is like really radical. And then, but the law today is very different on squatting as well. So it's kind of those contradictions.
Yeah. Wow. Saima, I'm wondering if anything's coming up for you when we're talking about the resistances, and also just thinking about the individualism. Where does that come from, and how does it, and you know, I mean, white supremacy, we know that, but like, what anything coming up for you on that front?
I mean, obviously now I think the current ongoing genocide in Palestine has been a bit of a paradigm shift here in terms of the unity, and not just across race and class, but also generational unity that we're seeing about this struggle, which has obviously been going on for 75 years or whatever. But what it brought up for me, I mean, I was thinking when I was listening to these two talking, I mean, I'm not an actor. I mean, I support a lot of, I go to the street and yell, and, you know, I donate stuff, but I'm not an organizer in that sense. But when I was doing the exhibition for the Tower Hamlets Archive and was given access to these recordings, of very rich, you know, amazing recordings of society and experience and politics from not just Bengali and Bangladeshi and Pakistani communities there, at the time East Pakistani communities, but also Somali migrants, and before them Jewish migrants as well, and just even the fights that were happening in Cable Street between sort of Jewish, not before the Battle of Cable Street, sorry, the fights were happening in Brick Lane, where Jewish Zionists and Jewish communists were arguing about whether there should be an Israeli state right on the corner of Osborne Street, you know. So it's I mean, this is all, like, it's funny how the micro becomes macro or whatever. But I was thinking also, well, Taz was talking, and also when you were talking about Southall, just like the anti-raids stuff that's been happening the last couple of years that have been really amazing to see. And I think there has to be more support within our communities for anti-deportation drives, because they're very effective. Because when a police van turns up and then there's 300 residents stopping the van, more often than not, I mean, you've seen them now, there's anti-raids, Camden, Lewisham, Brixton. For me, this is an incredible sign that, you know, that we're kind of, like, maybe we're not so depoliticized as we think we are, but there's been, and I think also with the Palestine stuff, I've been really...
That's what I was just thinking, albeit the kind of arms factories and all the people going there and, you know, demonstrating.
I mean, I've been to a few of the arms factory actions where you get up at 4 a.m. and the coach takes you somewhere to some Middle England warehouse, and you don't know where you're going until 20 minutes before you arrive, and you're like, oh shit, am I going to be arrested? And why did I come alone? And did I bring enough food? And you know, my expectations of doing that, which I never did before, was that they were kind of well-meaning liberal white guys running the thing, and a certain generation of anti-war people, socialists, you know. But there was such a diversity of people.
Yeah.
I've made so many friends, South Asian, Arab, otherwise, who on these things, because we're all standing there at 5 a.m. chanting to nobody. And for me, that was, I think, really, like, this, to me, has given me a lot of, maybe not hope, but it's given me a sort of yeah.
There's power of the people.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Let me just look at my notes. So yeah, I mean, in terms of the movements here in the diaspora, has there been, so speaking about that thing perhaps gives us a glimmer of hope, is there other examples of where the decolonisation process has been successful, in whether that be to do with resistance movements or any kind of legislative things that perhaps have been moved through? I know, Tasneema, you spoke a little bit about the acts that you were referencing, but is there anything perhaps so that we can leave here feeling a sense of actually it's a good thing to be politicized, it's a good thing to know that we can use our voice, that we can take to the streets, and a lot of that has been happening right in front of us now. There's no shying away from taking this to the streets locally, in whichever local regions we're in, because of the Palestine organizers encouraging us to actually also look to our local movements, as well as the National March, which many of us will have gone to today. What was my point? What was I saying? Yeah, anything you want to say on that? It's getting late.
I guess, yesterday, delivery drivers were on strike across 90 parts of the UK, and obviously majority of delivery drivers are, migrant workers. They're poor, they're racialized. So I think that's, they did that they self-organized that as well. So that was pretty radical. And then you got, in general, I work with drivers' unions, so I always see driver unions striking and doing crazy stuff. I think during one of the Palestine protests, Uber drivers were basically saying, this was in New York, but Uber drivers were, the police were arresting people, and Uber drivers were refusing to move from one of the protest parts, so they couldn't use their cars or something like that. So there's loads of things going on, especially when you really look into, especially with the workers. And I think as people that use Deliveroo, Uber Eats, etc., these people are getting paid £3 for every job that we do. It's crazy because they're so dehumanized that we're just expecting this package to come to our door. We don't want to see the person, whatnot.
Amazon.
Yeah.
And our overconsumption and need for consumption.
And the need that we need it right away.
Yeah.
We need
seamlessly.
Yeah, but we're not thinking about what people are being used for our next day deliveries to be so quick.
What harm are we complicit in?
Yeah, because there's going to be the poorest workers going out the way, and people think delivery is so easy if you're in a car or whatever. And I once was with my dad as he tries to do Uber deliveries, and it's so much you're driving to a place to give 2 Kit Kats to this person that can't be bothered to go downstairs and go. It's this need for we need it right now. This really wasn't an answer to your question, though.
No, it's great conversation. I'm loving this. There's no starting point or end point. We're just going right. I love it.
But yeah, just for the strikes yesterday were cool.
Yeah,
good.
yeah. No, really important to bring that up. Simon, anything from you?
I mean, listening to Ishri and Taz speak, and it's particularly because I'm interested in oral history, and I know that you're collecting stories from South, which I think is so amazing. I'd love to come and talk to you about that.
We must all connect. You have to connect.
I think we do need to keep speaking
Yeah.
to people older than us within our communities and recording, even if we don't agree with them, which is sometimes a problem that I've come across in my own research or own personal kind of curiosity about people in my family. And, I come from quite a privileged sort of lineage of Muhajirs who came from North India, and my dad's side are all army, and, we don't have the same politics at all.
Totally.
But at the same time, I think, to use Spivak's kind of coining of affirmative sabotage, which is kind of the approach I took to my thesis, which is okay, there's no written archives apart from this India records in British Library, or there's no oral histories that talk about, this is what I have, this is what we have,
Yeah.
And that creates room for not just, we can use the master's tools to break down the master's house. I don't agree with people who think otherwise. I found that in my own research when I was kind of looking into partition and sort of understanding the conditions of coloniality within the production of knowledge now about partition, not pre-1947. So that also creates a sort of politics of not just sort of resistance, but also invention, creativity, listening, sort of collaborating and undisciplining our sort of particular realms, you know.
Wow.
Like Taz, who's a friend, you know, she's like a lawyer and a union driver, you know, she does so much amazing things, and I'm a so-called artist researcher, and we've
Also
somehow made connections, and now I've met you, who's doing Orange Street in Southall, and there's like this element of like, yeah, we can cross these sort of knowledge divides within our communities, and also make it a bit fun, you know, and make it a bit, and make it creative, and make it hopeful. And I will end. I won't speak anymore.
No, please talk. Please go.
I always paraphrase. I always do this. And my partner, who's sitting here, is like sick of me quoting this. There was a protest, one of the most famous protest sites at CAA during the CAA movement in India, in Delhi, Shaheen Bagh in Delhi, which was.
Could you just a quick 101 of CAA, if you don't mind?
The Citizenship Amendment Act, which I think we talked about it quite a lot. Taz explained, you know, the sort of exclusion of who could be a refugee in India, who can be a citizen or not.
Yeah. Clearly not going in for me, so I have to ask you again. Anyway.
So it was like generally led by Muslim women and also queers and feminists, and you know, setting up. This was pre-COVID, so COVID was the reason why all these protest camps were sort of swept away, and everybody was told to go indoors. But I will paraphrase. I don't know in Hindi or Urdu, but there was a statement or an expression or a poster or something I saw from that time, which can be summed up as, we don't fight because we hope because we fight. And I think that's that I try and stay with that.
Yes, that is absolutely beautiful. Thanks, Omar. Ishri, anything to wrap up?
I don't know if I can follow that, but
Come on.
I think like what gives me inspiration and personal motivation to carry on is that they did it then, so we can do it now. And that was really like the reason why I even started researching it then, because I was like, I don't really agree with this idea that we're docile or we're quiet, because I've met a lot of South Asians and none of us are quiet. So like, where did this stereotype come from? And so in learning about these movements that happened before and getting to have these intergenerational conversations, we might not agree on everything, but there is a core belief here in the way that people should be treated and the way that we should treat communities. Like, your neighbours matter, the people on your street matter. It's important to know our names. It's important to shop locally, to be around one another. Because when you do, if something happens down the street, you care. And it's not just like something happened.
Individualism.
Or like the flat below you and you don't really know them. And in London, that's a real, as you rent and you don't have permanent housing, it's a lot easier to get stuck in that cycle of constant movement. And so, that's my biggest encouragement, is to know the people around you and know your communities. And if you're from an immigrant community, find out how they got there, because I guarantee you it's interesting. Wow. And I guarantee that someone fought for it to exist. And that deserves to continue to be fruitful for all of us.
Chills. This is Ishri's first time speaking in front of like a crowd like this, and I just wanted to... we don't have time for questions, but we're going to have an open mic after Amrit performs, so I'd like you to please give a massive round of applause to Tasneema, to Saima, and to Ishri for being here. Thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate your insights. Thank you so much. You can head off back to your seats, and if you would like to, please stand for our last artistic offering, and if you're able to, and just come on closer, as close as you can. Don't worry about our mapped out quote-unquote South Asia. Feel free to come on close. I'm going to need the most intimate setting for this, because if you heard the mic check, you know what's about to go down. Okay? So come on closer. Come closer. Take your shoes off if you want to. Come closer.
Okay, we can have the reverb off just while I'm introducing. Thank you. Sound of God. I'm going to start off by singing a song called Fire River Flow. I feel like we've heard a lot about histories of different regions and resistances and oppression, and I feel like this song, as Simon was saying, sound is so powerful. And when I was studying history at SOAS, like I mentioned before, I think I was always looking for sources where I could find what were real people thinking at the time of these massive political events such as 1947. And I couldn't find those voices until I found them in music, I found them in poetry, I found them in embroidery, in Fulgari embroidery from Punjab, from the women of Punjab. And in particular, I came across this poem written by Amrita Pritham. So this poem is very, very famous. It's actually included in the Indian national curriculum, but a lot of kids don't actually know what the historical context is. And I know this from doing workshops there. Like, I'd sing this song and they're like, yeah, we know it. And then you'd ask them questions about it and they had no idea what it actually meant. It was just a famous poem. So the first song I'm going to sing is in Punjabi, so I'll give a brief translation for people that don't understand Punjabi. It's actually written in the most simple Punjabi you can imagine, so anyone could understand. But she begins. It's written by Amrita Pritham, who was a progressive writer in the 1960s, and she's part of this progressive writers movement, and she decided to rewrite women back into the history of 1947. And in this poem, she wrote all the things and describes all the things that you didn't read in history books. So, for example, she was describing the land of Punjab, the land of 5 rivers, and the blood that was flowing through it. And she opens the poem by saying, "Aj aankhaं varishaं nu kitun kabran vichon bol," which literally translates to, "Today, Varisha, I ask and call upon you to speak upon your grave, to speak from your grave. You wrote an epic for one woman, and now thousands of women are crying. We need you to speak from your grave and write more." And Varisha was what you would call a very prolific writer. He wrote epics and poems, and he's known to be the author of Hiranja, the story of basically it's Romeo and Juliet, but written hundreds of years before Shakespeare wrote it. And so he's that kind of caliber of writer. So she's calling unto him to write more. And then she goes on to describe what Punjab looked like and questioning what love means and what brotherhood means and the protectors of community, as we were just talking about. And so for me, it was a really powerful poem when I read it, because this is exactly what I was looking for. I wanted to know what real people experienced, and here was someone describing it. And of course, there's later on in post-1984, the oral histories that came out of women describing what had happened to their mothers and people in their family. But women had ultimately become territory, and for me it was really important that this poem was heard, but in a context where you didn't need to understand the language of it, but you could kind of get what the feeling was. And I think that feeling is quite universal in everything that we talked about today. So for me, the most significant word in this poem is bol, which literally translates to speak. And I think if I was to summarize what we've talked about today, it would be with the word bol and speak and using our voices. And for me as a musician, singer-songwriter, for me it always comes down to music and how powerful music is in transcending language and borders and boundaries. So this is Aj Aankhaं Varishaं Nu, but I decided to turn it into a song because I couldn't find at that time a woman singing it or a composition of it. So I was like, well, I guess I have to do it myself. So, and at the time I was music directing a play at SOAS on 1947, and it was a good reason to do it then. So this one is called 5 River Flow. कि तू कबरा विचों ते अज किताब इश्क दा कोई अगला वर्का खोल कोई अगला वर्का खोल एक रोई सी थी पंजाब दी तू लिख लिख मारे वैन एक रोई सी थी पंजाब दी तू लिख लिख मारे वैन अज लखा दिया रोंदिया तेनो वारिस शानू कैन उठे धर्म दा दिया धर दिया उठता कपड़ा पंजाब अज बेले लाशा विशिया ते लो दी परी जनाब किसी ने पंजाब पानिया विच दित्ती जहर रिला ते उन्हां पानिया तरत नूं दित्ता पानी ला जिथे वजदी सी फूक प्यार दी मैं वंजली गई गुआच रांझे दे सब वीर अज भुल गए उस दी जाच धरती ते लो वसिया कबरा पईयां चौने प्रीत दिया शहजादियां अज विच मज़ारां रोए अज सब कैदों बन गए हुस्न इश्क दे चोर अज किथों ले आई लब के वारिस शायद होए अज आखां वारिस शानू कि तू कबरा विचों बोल 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 ते अज किताब इश्क दा कोई अगला वर्का खोल कोई अगला वर्का Thank you very much. Okay, so yeah, get comfortable. So this next song is called Paradise Lost. And I think it's one of those songs that I've written that I don't think I'm going to today introduce it or frame it in any way, in the way that I usually do, because I think you can, based on your own experiences and what you've taken from today, project your own feelings and emotions to it. So this one's called Paradise Lost. The story is yours. Pilgrimage led me to your door. Pilgrimage led me to your Thank you. For this last song, I'm going to ask you to help me sing it. So, actually, I need to turn this on. So I'm going to ask you to sing after me. So I'm going to sing the chorus. So this is from Sam Cooke's song, Change is Gonna Come. So I'm going to sing, said I know, and then you're going to sing, change is gonna come. Oh, yes, it will. Said I know change is gonna come. Oh, yes it will. Try one more time. Said I know that change is gonna come. Oh, yes it will. And when you're singing, feel free to close your eyes and let it mean what it means to you. So I'm going to start with the verse, and when you hear me sing that, you know what to do. I was born by the river, in a little tent, and just like the river, I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, a long time coming, but I know that change is gonna come. Oh, yes it will. Said I know that change is gonna come. Oh, yes it will. It's been too hard living, and I'm afraid to die. I don't know what's out there beyond the sky. It's been a long time coming, a long time coming, but I know that change is gonna come. Oh, yes it will. Said I know that change is gonna come. Oh, yes it will. Said I know that change is gonna come. Oh, yes it will. Said I know change is. Oh, yes it will. Thank you so much for having me. Singing with me.
Sorry. Give it up for Amrit Kaur, please. That's my sister. Went through a few tissues. That's my sister, Amrit. We actually met through community stuff and then have grown to become like sisters. So, yeah, just thank you for that offering. I love you loads. Open mic. Don't think there's a slide for it, or is there? I don't know if I did a slide for it or I didn't. Please share what you would like to for up to 2 minutes. Share thoughts that have come up for you. Plug your projects, most important, because we're all here. So probably the people that you want to hear about your project is also in the room. Ask for help, sing something if you want to follow Amrit. Free colonised people, I just put that in there for some jazz. So, who would like to come up and share something? We can go for, what time are we on? Yeah, we can go for 20 minutes. Who would like to start us off? Anybody at all feeling to come up? Thank you so much for coming. Get home safely. Message me. Thank you, nice to meet you. Thank you for staying for this long. We'll wrap up soon, everyone. I know hopefully we're feeling settled, but I thought we'd end on an open mic just to get that people power going. Yeah. Hold on, have the mic for the live streamers.
No, it's fine. I spoke to a couple of people, asking them what they wanted to get out of this event. So I'm looking at them now. I'd love to hear whether those questions, if you could say what that was and whether that was answered for you. I'm dying to know.
also want to use this opportunity to say this event possibly would not have possibly been possible without the person who's just spoken here. So please give a massive round of applause. They're both sat here. They put this whole thing together when I was jet-lagged for this whole week because I'd just come back from Mexico. So please give a massive round of applause for both Ishri and Project, please. It would not have been possible, not even remotely. Everything you see here has all been done from scratch. Just research and research and research, and then everyone just really came together to make this happen with their skills, you know? So it's been a real labor of love for a few months, and then most especially this week. So thank you so much. I will always, always honor and respect you for that. Regardless of that anyways, but, you know, for that. So yeah, Prabjit's call was, if you feel like coming up and sharing what you had shared at the beginning, do you feel like you've got anything unanswered, or you feel like that was actually really wholesome and really good, or, yeah? Anyone want to share a project that they're working on right now that they'd like to talk about? Would you like to come up, please? Come on. If you feel, yes! Now I've really got to wait for her to come up. I really want her to come up. I love that. What are open mics for? Don't apologise. You're doing us a favour. Sonia. Come forward, Sonia. Do you want to take a seat here? Come sit down. Give it up for Sonia, please. Sorry, Rich Mix. Sorry, Rich Mix, sorry.
Hello. I write
Sonia.
poetry in Hindi and Urdu, and I wrote this one because I was very distressed about the Ukrainian war and then Palestinian, all the trouble that's happening. So now so it's in Hindi, but I can translate it afterwards. Usne mara, maine mara. Usne toda, मैंने तोड़ा एक दूसरे का सर फोड़ा छोटी छोटी कुछ लाशें सफ़ेद कपड़े में लिपटी गईं उधर भी माँ बिलखती रही इधर भी चीख गूंजने लगी नफ़रत के इस खेल में इंसानियत चुपके से मरने लगी पर उसने फिर मारा मैंने भी मारा सबक जो सिखाना था जल के राख हो गया उसका घर और मेरा घर अपने घरों में महफूज तमाशाई कहते रहे सबक तो सिखाना था सबक तो सिखाना था So the futility of war, basically, the futility of war, that he broke my house, I broke his house, and he killed me and I killed him, and they said we just wanted to teach him a lesson, but then we all sort of destroyed each other. And there's a tiny one which I just wanted to, again about war, because it's really been distressing me. गुज़रे ज़माने में जंग के उसूल होते थे मैदाने जंग में योद्धा लड़ते बच्चे घरों में सोते थे अब तो बारूद और बम घरों पे फेंक देते हैं ये कैसी लड़ाई है जिसमें बच्चे शहीद होते हैं कहीं आग से खेलते खेलते अपना घर ना जल जाए गुज़रे ज़माने में जंग के उसूल होते थे There used to be rules of war in the olden days. Now there's no rules, and you just kill innocent people, and that is really bothered me.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you so much, Sonia. Someone else? Feeling called to come? Come on, please. Yes. Dylan, give it up for Dylan, please.
Thank you, everyone. So for those who don't know me, my name is Dylan. I'm based here in London. No one important, just do fashion, retail, design, things like that. But what they spoke about, wasn't sure if I should say, I've been standing all day. One of the things that been touched on from the panels that we had today was that what we're speaking about community, speaking also about resistance and how to face oppression, but we don't really know what these things are until they're faced in us, in the face. So when we face these things, we think, well, maybe this is to do with hatred or prejudice or straight up just injustice as well. However, it's not always a hate thing. We work towards and produce, and like we did, support things unconsciously. Deliveroo, we mentioned things like Uber Eats. We also think it's not really an age thing either. There are people who are my age and younger who also completely removed from everything that's happening, whether it's here or whether it's in other countries. And then it's not just a race thing. There are people with our own skin tones, our own people of color who have also accepted the colonial mindset. So these are also things that we can't really take into account, and we don't know what we're facing. It also doesn't really make sense in the sense that we can't understand what we're fighting against if it's already within us. The resistance, we spoke about some fantastic groups, especially from whether it's in Tower Hamlets or even my old background in West London, you mentioned South Hall. These are all groups that we really take into account, but really the resistance is within ourselves as individuals. We have to stand up for ourselves even when nobody else can. And that's something that we have to wake up and face every single day. And it's fantastic we get to have a collective community in ourselves. To find community within yourself is the biggest challenge, and especially when we've been grown up and taught to challenge and accept individualism. This is a thing that's always really far-fetched to find out, to actually find out there are people who are like-minded from all sorts of places. Like, I've come here from East London tonight. Originally, I've lived in North London, lived in West London. When I was a child, I was present during the 2011, try not to use the word riot, but
Uprising.
and then these things spread across the nation like wildfire. And then we've also witnessed these things where we started from the New Cross Gate fire back in the 80s. My main background is with, Black Caribbean, Chinese, Polynesian, Portuguese. Talk about rich mix.
What a
That's
mix.
what
Rich mix. You took rich mix literally.
But Grenada, one of my countries, is about to support its 50th year of independence coming up next week. It's a very young country, but it's a place that also doesn't understand how to separate from the map that we have here, where you can see there's been a clear system of divide and conquering. And even a country as small as insignificant as a tiny, tiny, tiny island. I've only realized that this place is also a tiny, 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 tiny island.
True that.
And a saying from my islands as well, we talk about small axe. Small axe can chop a big tree. So what we also do from this sense as well is we can see where everything has been sectored, but if we can always find that, come together, but also remember that you can find it within yourself as well. And I think that this is what, as we speak about resistance, we also have to learn to love ourselves when nobody else will. And then hopefully we can find some unity once we find some within ourselves as well. I just want everyone to remember, if you do go home tonight, just remember that you do have yourself, and when you have yourself, we have each other. Thank you.
Give it up for Dylan, please. Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Dylan. Appreciate you. It reminds me, what you were just saying just now reminds me of Bisan a few months ago was talking about how, can't you see, do you see now that things have not been what you presumed them to be? Can you see now that there are so many truths that you should seek? Can you see now that actually fighting for our struggle will also liberate you? Sorry. And there's this thing around, not idolizing individuals who've been kind of on the ground and showcasing what's going on to kind of allow the world to see what the truth is on the ground. And so that is completely, I completely understand that, Bisan's life or Mataz's life is just as valuable as all the other almost 30,000 martyrs since 120 days. And yet that has stuck with me so strongly that actually liberating Palestine liberates us as individuals in this society, in these structures, in these systems, in a capitalist system, in a white supremacist system, in any supremacist system. And we've got so much to learn from those people who've been on the ground, who've been showing us, just point blank. They don't need to, they're not celebrities, they've just been showing us. And so that reminded me, Dylan, thanks for sharing, of our liberation, our individual liberation, our collective liberation. It has been, for me, inspired by the Palestinians and all the colonized peoples around the world that are still fighting for their liberation as well. Any more? Before, yes, come on. Okay, yeah, come up. What's your name? Samara's just moved here from up north, from Leeds. So please give her a warm welcome here.
Oh, thank you. I'm a Pisces, so I like to cry. Hearing Amrit just sing just evokes so much emotion in me. So I lost my grandma last May, and I never learnt Punjabi. I didn't want to learn it growing up, and so many times we sat together just in silence. And when you're a kid, you just think, oh, it doesn't matter. I can speak it brokenly. But then when she died, it just was like, I wanted to reconnect with Punjabi, and I really wanted to learn it. And my grandma always says to my mum, why don't you teach them? And she really tried to teach us, but I don't know, it was just that kind of being a third generation and like rejecting that part of identity for so long, and growing up in a predominant, like Leeds is multicultural, but it's majority white, and rejecting that part of my identity for so long and suppressing it. And so being in this space today just got me really emotional because, I heard you singing Punjabi, and, it just really evoked me, and I'm so thankful to be in a space like this, because it's the first time coming to something like this as well. So I'm trying to immerse myself into community as much as I can. So thank you so much for having this space, it's been a great community to be part of. Yeah, sorry.
Do say hi, please. Do say hi.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lola. Yeah, come on.
Very briefly, I feel that regarding language, and the more I learn about this, the more I understand that actually learning, reconnecting to that language, the Sufism, the Qawwali, the poetry that is our oral history, is the way to liberate ourselves and find new ways of being. Practical note, I'm trying to organize little Qawwali choirs, because, just like sing together and, and look at the meanings of those things as well. So I've had the first one in Jan, hoping to do another one next month. So welcome, come to me, speak to me, and come jam at my house. Yeah. Where's my invite? Sorry, I didn't mention it. You're invited now, formally.
Good job I wasn't in the country, I'd have thrown hands. Qawwali choir, are you kidding? That sounds amazing. Yeah, just come along, you don't need to sing, just a choir. No, it's amazing. Right, you know where to find her. Anyone else before? I thought that was you again. Oh, excited. Anybody else want to come up? Any final closing remarks? Who's feeling brave? I'm seeing some faces that are like, should I go up and share this thing that's on my mind, or should I just leave it? Because she's about to wrap up anyways. Go on then, Jummy, come. Come here.
Oh, wow, thank you so much for tonight. I feel really privileged just being here and actually being alive. And I feel like my ancestors are really alive with me right now. Yeah, just being together and like speaking, like you said. So much of the healing is coming just by being present with each other in our bodies, in our voices, in our hearing. I feel really privileged that I'm alive at this time, even though it's really fucking hard. Just really thankful. And I was thinking, something that keeps coming into my mind now, like ever since it was said, was the burning of the documents, imagining the smoke of them, the trees that they came from, the whispers that are like in the air, and their stories where do those stories go and land? And like the way the earth whispers to us, and how we carry the stories and they're passed on to us, and yeah, speaking them. So this is something it just came to me maybe a month ago or something, but I just wanted to share it about knowledge. The ocean of knowledge evaporates into thin air, returns as raindrops that fall just at the right time, just when you need them. Thank you.
I love you too.
Thank you. Give it up for Jimmy, please. I've just been non-stop sobbing all evening. Oh, that's new. Anyone else before we wrap up? I'm just looking really intently on this side to make sure that no one is feeling like coming up and then stopping themselves. Over here, no. Okay. Okay, well, I'll count to 5. 1, 2. It's like I'm auctioning. 3. Going once. 4, 5. I guess if you don't want to say anything, I'll just wrap up now. You don't want to say anything. Do you or do you not? You do, because you're being called to, because I felt the pull, because you see, that's the thing. I felt the pull to give it up. What's your name?
Hey, I'm Sam.
Sam, please come to the front. Come on. Feel comfortable.
I actually hate public speaking, so it's... I'm Sambhavi. I just moved to London from Sydney, actually really recently, last few months. So yeah, just sort of settling into London and trying to find my tribe, trying to find like the people that I really resonate with and that I really align with. And I just want to say thank you so much for holding this event. Like, it's been incredibly, I've never been to an event like this, and it's just been so cathartic, to say the least. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for putting it on. I think growing up in Australia, it's been really interesting hearing the conversations in the UK about, the politics and the way that colonialism has impacted the various communities here, and the way that you sort of dissect how Britain's colonisation on other countries, how we've analysed that. I think growing up in Australia, we have our own sort of different experiences of colonisation. We have our First Nations people, and the way that colonisation has impacted Australia it's such a deep-seated and entrenched settler colonial state. Australia recently had a referendum last year where we were going to the polls to try and recognise our First Nations people in our constitution, in our founding constitution. The country voted against it. And I can't tell you how deeply saddening, how deeply frustrating, how deeply disgusting it is to kind of see where we are at in 2024 as a society. And yeah, I think that all of the British Empire's states now, we have a lot of reckoning to do with our past, and as a Western country, Australia, we are deeply racist, and I think that's something that we still find so challenging to face up to. And yeah, we just have a long way to go. And so I just want to say thank you so much for holding this space for everybody. And I just felt like my heart really opened up. So thank you so much.
What's your name again? Give it up for Sambhavi, please. Please say hi to her. Welcome her to London. Welcome to London. It is a much better place. we are open about all these things. These communities exist, you know. This is not the only event. There are so many. There's a group. Shout out to the Rights Collective. They've been doing conversations around more specifically South Asia and its archives, and you know, making sure that we can critique our communities in the right ways. They also have a group chat called South Asian Solidarity for Palestine as well, that's just been recently set up. So please do get in touch if you want to be added to that. I can share the link and hopefully that you can get added on. Nija Manoush and you know, all of the Nejma Collective and all of Tasnima's work that she's been doing. Saima's involved in various things, including Nija Manoush as well. And then Ishri is over here if you wanted to chat. Prabjit's here if you wanted to chat. In the meantime, I've been learning to DJ, so if you want to hang around, I think I might do a 20-minute set. Because it's Saturday and because joy is also part of liberation. So maybe we should move our bodies. If you feel like listening to my style, you can hang around for 15 minutes and then we'll wrap up. But I just want to say thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I'm going to ask the two of you to come up, please. No, okay, you don't want to come up, but I just want to say, please, this wouldn't have happened. This would not have happened without these two individuals. So if you want to say thank you to anyone, it's definitely them too. And also thank you to yourselves. This is a Saturday night evening after the march. I mean, big up yourselves for being here. Come on. Please give it up for Amrit, my sister, for singing so beautifully. Please give it up for Sarah, the absolutely phenomenal woman she is. And please give it up for Rich Mix's team. We've got Elliot at the back, and I've forgotten his name. Kieran as well. Please give it up for Kieran. The security always do a wonderful job. That's my friend there. Thank you so much. And our bar staff, we've got D at the bar and his colleagues. Thank you so much. You're really, really lovely. And yeah, I'll just get on the decks, I guess. But stay in touch. And thank you for coming. And have a lovely evening. Get home safely. Thank you so much, everyone.